Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Truth About AI. You're going to hear it here first. My name is Chine McDonald, and I'm delighted to be chairing this session with Poole and Nick Spencer, who I'll introduce to you shortly. There is hardly a day that goes by without news headlines about AI. We're told that AI will take our jobs, that it will take over. And frankly, most of what we hear about it is terrifying. But not all of the stories are of the horror sci-fi genre. AI presents us with new opportunities, new efficiencies, perhaps more time. It's clear that the hope comes with a bit of fear, though. Well, what should we expect from the AI revolution? How should we respond? Will AI replace us? And what is the religious, the spiritual dimension in all of this? I'm joined by two excellent speakers. Dr. Eve Poole, OBE, is chair of the Woodard Corporation, a family of Christian schools. She has written several books, including Leadersmithing, Buying God, and Robot Souls, Programming in Humanity, that she's going to be talking about today. And previously, she was the chair of Gordonston and Third Church Estates Commissioner. And Eve has twins and lives in Edinburgh. My friend and colleague, Dr. Nick Spencer, is our senior fellow at Theos. He is the author of many, many books. Most recently, The Landscapes of Science and Religion, What Are We Actually Disagreeing About? And Playing God, Science, Religion and the Future of Humanity. And Magisteria, The Entangled Histories of Science and Religion. Now, just a disclaimer, Nick really loves science and religion stuff, but is getting a bit bored of talking about it. But this might be the last opportunity that you have to hear him talking about science and religion. But there's no better person I'd want to have this conversation with. We're going to have about half an hour of discussion between the three of us, and then we'll open it up to questions. But I want to start by first inviting Eve, first and then Nick, to talk about the book. Tell us about the ideas in Robot Souls and the journey that led you to writing it.
Thank you. Well, this is the book, Robot Souls. I wrote it to you, really, because I think we're all a bit puzzled about AI. It feels a bit scary, and I know some of you in the room know a thing or two about it, but most of my friends don't, and most would like to understand exactly how much to worry about it and what particular direction. So there is a very useful 20-page glossary full of all the long words about neural networks and all kinds of stuff in there. And there is a sort of whistle-stop tour through things like the history of the soul, consciousness, mind, body problem, all that stuff that we probably should have paid attention to at university, but have long since forgotten. And a bit of stuff about where our eyes got to. And then the argument, which is about the title Robot Souls and the subtitle Programming in Humanity, which is what I'm really worried about. So what I'm worried about is that it occurs to me it's in a mad dash to optimize through replicating the bits of us that we think are true, beautiful and good. We have taken a kind of top slice of our understanding of humanity, which is very much about our fabulous rational decision-making prowess, and turbocharged that through programming algorithms and compute. And we're now worried, or certain AI experts are worried, about what happens if this creation of ours goes rogue. That they call the control problem. And you've all sat with your cornflakes or your popcorns in front of the telly, watching all kinds of scenarios where the robots take over, so you know where that thought is coming from. And I thought, well, why haven't we gone rogue? If we're copying ourselves, we might learn from understanding more about what it is we're copying. So what is it that we do in our own species, in our own design, that stops us going rogue? And in trying to answer that question, I discovered a lot of what I described in my book as junk code. So lots of things that we thought were kind of flaky, rubbish, embarrassing flaws in our own makeup, like, intuition, sixth sense, stuff we burnt witches for, and emotions, all that kind of soppy stuff, and uncertainty in the state. Oh, all that really gassed and stuff. It's so shaming. We had to put it into AI because, it's flaky and clumsy. But when you start getting really interested in all of those bits you've left on the cutting room floor, all that junk code, you realise that if we're made in the image of God, then they can't be flaws, they must be features. And they're probably why we are still here as a species, and they're probably implicated in why, on average over time, in spite of the fact we have all done historically dreadful things, we are still alive as a species and still buggering on, as Fletcher said. So the book is trying to say, well, why can't we understand more about this junk code? Why can't we foreground it? Why can't we nurture it? And why can't we use it to not only understand our own humanity, but to program humanity into AI? And that's where it gets onto slightly dodgy territory, which is we were made in God's image. If we're making something in our own image, we should be doing damn sight better view of it than we are, because what we are making is something which is incredibly deficient and will fail and shames us. So we're failing as creators in making something so rubbish. So that might be quite controversial. We might want to talk about that. But I also want to talk about the fact that these things, these forgotten, shaming things, to me seem to be hallmarks of soul, which is why I've called my book Robot Souls.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with Eve, who is a very dear and long-standing friend, and Chine, who is actually my boss as well.
Great boss.
So if you can kind of laugh at my jokes and applaud my profundities, I'd be very grateful. Very briefly, the genesis of Playing God is historical, really. As Chine mentioned, I wrote a book on the history of science and religion that came out a few years ago. As many of you will know, popular view is science and religion have been in opposition with one another forever. It's simply not the case. I was writing a book explaining a truer, more accurate, I think, picture of the relationship between science and religion historically. We might talk about that later, but I think we're more talking about the future now. The book ends around the end of the 20th century. One of the arguments in the book is that the conversation between science and religion has got most interesting and often most contentious in history when either discipline makes a land grab for the idea of the human. So if either discipline says humans are only, that is a red flag. If anyone uses the word only when it comes to describing the humans, challenge them. Humans are only evolved primates. Humans are only machines. Humans are only their genes, and so on and so forth. Now, contemporarily, that claim is increasingly being made that humans are only information. The logic goes, humans are distinct from other species because we're clever. Intelligence is a matter of information processing. AI can now process information faster and better than we can. Therefore, AI is cleverer than we are. Therefore, AI is more human than we are. And the argument I develop in Playing God is that that leaves out an incredibly important aspect of being human, which is also being alive. And that's a kind of a slightly casual thing to say, but every single one of us here has a body. In fact, we don't have a body, we are a body. Physicality is central to human existence. It's incredibly telling that in his seminal 1950 paper that really set the hairs running when it came to AI, Alan Turing, who did effectively the Turing test as it came now, explicitly discounts the relevance of the body. He's talking about artificial skin in the article, as a means of telling whether a creation is human or artificial. That's a remarkable thing to say that the body is not significant to who we are. Actually, this dovetails very nicely with what Eve's talking about, because as we all know, our bodies are quite imperfect. And actually our minds are imperfect. So it's our imperfections, our fragilities, our vulnerabilities, our dependencies that make us who we are. And one of the arguments of the book is to try and introduce that factor back into a discussion about AI, which drifts away into these abstractions about high levels of information processing without considering what it actually means to exist.
Excellent. So, 1950, you were talking about there. We're now at 2025. That's a lot of years of development, technological advancements in AI. What is it that we are talking about now when we're talking about AI and AGI, artificial general intelligence? What is it about these particular advancements that potentially worries you or doesn't worry you? Does it give you hope? What has been the change between those years?
I think, it's a very important point. This is 75 years or so. These things actually tend to take longer than we anticipate. There's a chapter in the book about genetic engineering, which begins with Bill Clinton standing on the White House lawn in 2000 saying, we're on the cusp of curing diseases. 25 years later, the progress there's been progress, but it's been slower than many people expected. So these things tend to go a bit slower than we think. Might be at a tipping point at the moment. There are two issues for me here. One is, if you like, metaphysical, and the other was political. The metaphysical issue is this fundamental question of at what point would we have to recognise rights for AI? At what point would you say that AI is the kind of entity that merits rights? That is a question that is interestingly being asked of non-human animals very significantly at the moment. There's lots of court cases in the US about trying to recognise the legal personhood of chimpanzees and elephants and dolphins and things like that. Well, at what point would AI be sufficiently quote-unquote human to recognise its rights? I actually think this is a fantastically long way off. I don't have an a priori reason why AI would never acquire rights and personhood, but going back to my previous argument, that's about the status of the body and the extent to which an AI becomes as vulnerable, contingent, dependent, fragile as the average human being. I think a more pressing concern is, Eve alluded to this, the conversation seems to be supercharged at the moment, and things seem to be happening very quickly. It's partly because of ChatGPT and everyone going bananas about that. It seems to me that at the moment progress is being governed by the logic of the market. Essentially, if we don't develop this stuff really, really quickly, our competitors will, or the Chinese will. So we better get very quick about it. As I understand it, although I'm absolutely no expert in regulation, the Europeans are quite good at regulating this stuff. But there's a concern I have that in the desperate desire to build trade relationships with Trump's America at the moment, Europeans will water down regulation. So I have a bigger concern, not so much about the status of AI and whether it will usurp us as people, although there are big employment questions there, but simply about the extent to which regulation and reflection can keep up with the pace of development that's forced on this area by the logic of the market.
So my book is called Robot Souls. So picking up on what Nick just said about embodiment, I think a lot of the conversation about AI has been about computer programs, and it has felt like it is about copying the mind and is a disembodied sort of intelligence. The reason I actually finally sat down and wrote this book was because of something I saw in a documentary that absolutely terrified me. And you will know that for years, robotics has happened over there in the kind of engineering department, and AI, if there is such a thing, has happened in the computing / mathematics department over there. And because universities all hate each other, no one talks to anyone. Pod Lipson, in his lab in Columbia University in America, is a robotics expert who was given the challenge of trying to figure out what do you do about the Mars rover if a meteor sort of hits it on the leg and it breaks, because you can't send the lads up to fix it. So what are you going to do to enable the Mars rover to heal itself if an accident happens all those many light years away, or however many miles we can see from Mars? So he thought, well, what I'll do is I'll build a sort of little robot, which looked a bit like thing from the Addams family. It's just some 4 little fingery leg things, and I'll put a bit of basic AI in it, and not in its head, it doesn't have one, but in it. But I won't sort of stuff ChatGPT. Look, lucky black cat. That's because you're marvellous about to be promoted. I won't do sort of ChatGPT and Google. We'll just put some basic stuff in so that it could figure out how to learn, and we'll see how it does that, how it learns from scratch. So they put this funny little thing in a pen, and gave it the instruction to learn how to walk to the other end of the pen. And then they all stood around watching this thing. So for the first few days, they flopped about in a really pathetic fashion. And eventually it figured out how to coordinate these funny wee leg things and sort of staggered about. And eventually by the end of the week, it had figured out how to walk itself from one end of the pen to the other. They thought, brilliant, let's test this whole Mars rover idea. So they pulled about it and ripped a leg off to see if it could do that with 3 legs, if a meteor did it. So you see it flopping about with 3 legs, and it takes it maybe 2 or 3 days this time, but it figures out how to stagger to the other side with a pen. So they thought, brilliant, well, let's debrief this thing and figure out what it did to teach itself that. And they found something which they were not expecting, which is that it had repurposed an entire artificial neuron to read their facial expressions. So you have to imagine they're in a lab. These researchers are all standing around, a bit like you do as a toddler when they're learning how to walk. You're all, and of course it is feedback, but I mean, nobody thought a pretty brainless little robot would figure out that actually the feedback of observers is data to help you learn. They literally haven't thought it could think outside the box. So they haven't thought that maybe they should program it not to murder them, because that would, of course, be another way to ace the game. But because it hadn't occurred to them, it wouldn't just be sitting quietly Googling, clever engineering maneuvers for how to manipulate full limbs in 3D. And I thought, if you talk to programmers about AI and consciousness, which is a great way, by the way, to keep theologians and philosophers busy over there so they're not getting interested in regulation and existential questions, they imagine that with artificial general intelligence, which is one program that could do everything rather than one for chess and one for protein folding and one for doing your knitting for you, that consciousness would spontaneously emerge because there'd been this understanding amongst the scientific community that we got consciousness when we got so incredibly brainy. Our brains didn't really cope without consciousness as well. And so it's only really a matter of time before we create something that's brainy enough to have to develop consciousness. But this thing, which didn't have very much brain at all, and a very basic skeleton, had figured out what they are very carefully calling self-awareness, because it needed that to be able to manipulate its body in 3D. So we have seen from having babies, those of us who've been around any of these things, that they sort of lie there being annoying and he's in a nappy stage and screeching for years. Well, not quite years. But then as soon as they start either rolling over and sitting up, suddenly their development shoots up, doesn't it? Because there's something about being embodied that accelerates brain development. So one of my particular worries at the moment is now that the engineers and the computer scientists are finally talking to each other, when you embody AI, you get some quite dramatic increases in capacity quite quickly. And I don't think we have done the intellectual legwork to understand what that might mean in terms of things like robot rights, all these kinds of other stuff, which is, again, one of the reasons I wrote the book now.
Gosh, so you touched on the computer scientists talking to engineers. We talked about conversations about AI occupying theologians. We talked about the regulations, the politics. I want to kind of touch in on what makes this a theological question. We're seeing, having discussed 75 years and more on kind of advancement in this area, it feels like the past few years this has entered into the theological space in a way that it wasn't before. There are all sorts of kind of initiatives being sprung up around AI and theology, AI and philosophy. What's AI got to do with religion? And is it, as The Atlantic asked in 2017, a threat to Christianity? Now, I'll add in one more thing there, because a few months ago, Eve, we were in a meeting with an important group of clergy, and you asked them whether they would baptise AI. And I was fascinated by that conversation. So interested in this space, AI, theology, spirituality. What should I say?
Well, I think it's theological for a couple of reasons. One is that we are making something in our own image. And there is a lot of warning in our scriptures about what happens about making images. And whether something is a graven image or an idol or an icon. And certainly at the moment we're making idols and not icons. And so I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in Imago Dei and taking our own design seriously before we presume to try and copy it. But in particular, when you think, a lot of people write AI off as just another, it's like the washing machine. We're all quite giddy about the washing machine because hooray for 1950s women's emancipation. And it's just like that, isn't it? Calculators and stuff. But this is actually one of the first times that we had decided to make a tool, make something that, yes, would help us, yes, might make us stronger, all those things, but is also designed to replace us in a way that the pencil or computer or is not designed to replace us quite the same way. And we have been an apex predator for a long time. So even though lions and bears and snakes and things can still finish us off, because we're so frightfully cunning, we normally manage to avoid that. So we have generally been in charge for a long time. We have never had an intellectual competitor of this type before. And I don't think we really know theologically what our response to that is. I'll talk about the baptism thing, and then maybe Nick can say something about religion in general. Will we all worship ARs? I don't know. The question I asked the bishops, we actually started with, would you baptize an alien? Because they have now found planets, haven't they, where the chemical spectrographic analysis shows likelihood of life, whether or not it will still be there when you finally get in army planes and go visit. And so it seems to be more likely than it was a few years ago that probably there is alien life of some kind. So I asked the bishops, if one of these pushes it up, the church on Sunday and has to be baptised, what would your response be? And that was quite funny because some of them were absolutely clear that, of course, because God obviously made the aliens too, and that's fine. And then some of the bishops said, well, but maybe they're not made in our God's image, though. If they don't look like us, they're probably not made in God's image. And then there became a hilarious conversation, which is we would certainly baptise Yoda because we like Yoda. And baby Yoda, of course. But those green blob things that can't speak the King's English? We're not so keen on that. So it started surfacing some really interesting ideas about what we're up to when they're baptizing and what would you need to be as an entity to be baptizable. So we then went on to octopuses, because octopuses are frightfully intelligent, aren't they? They wouldn't baptize octopuses. They already had to do pet blessings, donkeys on Palm Sunday, all that stuff. They're a bit done with that. So it's all very clear they're not going to do that. In fact, if I may quote, the Archbishop of York did say that if he was asked to bless an octopus, he would anoint it with oil and then fry it and eat it for lunch. So it certainly wasn't about intelligence, but it seems that there are certainly other species that may be more intelligent than we are, like octopuses possibly. But again, they can't say the creek, can they? So they're toast, quite literally. Then I asked them if they baptised my clone, and they were all totally up for that, which I thought was appalling, actually, because I just think built in a lab with no childhood and no formation. That they just replicated me. But they thought probably my replicated soul would have historically been baptized, so I guess we want a technicality. And then we got around to AI. Would you baptize an AI? Now, there were quite clear if it was data from Star Trek, that'd be no problem. It's not quite like data from Star Trek. But, if it's ChatGPT, no. No, don't be so stupid. So again, really interesting, because we do baptize infants who can't tell us that they believe in God and all that kind of stuff. We have routines for that, of course. We baptize all kinds of people who are non-verbal or not able to express themselves, like octopuses or may not be able to, whatever that might be. We seem to be quite clear about the baptism of humans, that we have never been very clear about what we're up to in defining a human. And I suppose that's the big problem in this whole debate, is it's exposing the fact that we're really shaky on our definition of human. So if me and Nick were going to go into court right now up against an AI who was trying to tell us they were human, and we had to prove they weren't because we're cross about that and they're nicking all our energy apart from theirs, it's actually very hard to find anywhere where humanity is thoroughly defined. So if you read things like the Human Rights Act, it doesn't really say in the list of definitions what it means by human. And actually, the Turing test is only if something can fake being human. So where are we going to go to with our basic protections that we have absolutely assumed when we have co-intelligences that are probably more intelligent than us, who may need resources like energy, if we have no idea whether we would baptize an octopus or a clone or an alien, and on what grounds? See, that was what that conversation was about.
Yeah. Yes, the important clergy were the bishops, yes. Nick, I know you've got some ideas about what it is to be human. Talk about this kind of whole space of theology and AI.
So many different thoughts were spinning off from what you said, Eve. I'm going to find this very difficult to speak.
Would you baptize an octopus?
Not an octopus, no, but they're a very interesting example, as are aliens are very interesting examples. Try and marshal my thoughts. Why is this a religious issue? I absolutely countersign what Eve said, as I made the point earlier. Historically, it's when science has said humans are only evolved primates or whatever it is. That's actually been at the core of when there's been in a dispute, and we're in a dangerous moment where there's a lot of it's called nothing buttery in the literature. Humans are nothing but that. Our ability to understand, to modify, to control, to quote-unquote improve the human, park that term for the time being, is unprecedented at the moment. That is kicking up the kind of questions that science, by definition, cannot answer, because science is successful because it's limited. It's physics, not metaphysics. So a good example of this would be, and which we haven't talked about, but I write about it in my book, radical life extension. And this seems like science fiction, it still is, but all the billionaires are pouring huge amounts of money into extending human lives. The whole kind of cryonics thing, when we had to basically put someone in a refrigerator in San Francisco to keep them alive at some point or other, that's ancient technology now. And there are some really successful signs about extending not only lifespan, but what's known as health span. Okay, the question is then, would you do it? And would you want to live to 120 or 140 or 160 or whatever it might be? And would you want to live to that age if everyone you knew had died? Well, that invites the question, what's actually life in the first instance? Is life a mere continuation of the physical organism that I am? Or is life communion? Is life relationship? Are we organisms or are we persons? I would argue we're both. Nothing's more than only. But persons are loved into existence. Organisms are physically created or born. Time and time again, genetic engineering, briefly, another great example. Okay, it's been very slow so far, but CRISPR-Cas9, the thing that's been developed in the last 10 years or so, is speeding up our ability to modify the human genome. Now, it's turned out to be much more complex than people thought. Genes don't operate as a code, they operate as a language, and therefore it's not a question of flicking this one on and flicking this one off to change us. But superficially, if we could do that, would we? And you have these questions asking, well, how far should we go to seek human perfection? What is human perfection? What is intrinsic to the human good that we should seek its furtherance, seek its perfection? Is it our intelligence? Is it our stature? Is it our good looks? Is it our sight or whatever else? It is a fundamentally, in the first instance, ethical question, but because it's so obviously about us, it becomes an anthropological question, and that is where theology has a great deal to say, because so much theological reflection is centered around who and what the human being is. And how do we understand that within a metaphysical framework? One tiny little example of what I mean by this, listening to a Radio 4 program a few weeks ago, and they're talking about AI. It was the Matthew Side program, I think it was. And one of the people on it said, there was a similar kind of conversation about, are you scared of what's the future hold? And they said, I think it's a really challenging moment because AI is the first example of a technology, of a creation humans have created that stops doing or could stop doing what its creator wants it to do. The first kind of creation that stopped doing, and I thought, there's a story in the Bible about that, isn't there? They didn't reference it at all, but kind of that's Genesis, right? So there's a sense of this can sound really pompous and arrogant. We've been here before, by which I don't mean there's a theological answer to this. It's not as simple as that. But humans have considered this question about what is the nature of a human? Who is a human? What does human good lie in? Where does human fallibility lie? What do you do with a creation that no longer obeys its creator? This is an existing script, and it's one that I think theology can profoundly talk into.
Fascinating stuff. I'm going to open it up to questions now. And while you're thinking, we're going to take the first three if possible. But before I forget to say, if you are enjoying this conversation, if you're enjoying the festival, then we'd encourage you to get a subscription to the Church Times, the home of religious book reviews, extracts, author interviews, and analysis and conversations like this. So please do. Let's take three questions.
Thanks very much. I'm so pleased to share these book wrappers because that's what I wanted to hear people talk about aliens and what do we actually think, because it's sort of a thing that we skirt around and don't think is really a question. But actually, when you ask those questions, it then, and this is why it's shocking, the bishop didn't have more, it actually invites you to think, what is my theology? Yeah. Cousin said. And, who did you stand for them? Did he die for people on the Centauri? Alien. What is creation? What is it, creation doctrine? Is it, can see become human? We combine that with our knowledge about evolution, which suggests that everything is just light. So I'm really pleased you're asking those questions.
Thank you. Let's have first. We're going to take three. So yeah, take this person here. No power.
Thank you. Yes, on that. Oh, no, thank you. I have to say that was fantastic, and I'm fascinated by what you said. And I'm particularly interested in the idea of embodiment, because I know a lot of people who are working in the area of agentic, where you create an agent to have the ideas and follow through in business for you. The people I know working in the legal area, so you're a law firm, but they've one sold an A or big law firm. And what you do, you put all the information, legal information, into one agent, and then the agent can answer any questions that anybody needs to know, not only for people in-house, but also externally. And thus you can get rid of all your other lawyers just up on, you get chapter. And of course, accountants are doing that in all professions. And the people who I know who are working in the field, and they're in, America, they all say it's going to take about 4 years for the middle management professionals to be out. They haven't started thinking about the areas that you're bringing up, but it's clear that we're on the cusp, like a huge mobilization of activity, huge. Yeah. And I'm personally really excited about it, and I use AI every day, and my top choice is perplexity.
Thank you. And then the third question in this round is this person here with glasses? Just here?
You're going to do three at a time?
Three at a time, yeah.
I feel slightly embarrassed by the question, but it's with me, so I'm going to ask her. But when you said, we haven't gone rogue, I kind of was thinking it's myself. You sure? We hear this a lot of the time, AI may go rogue, and I was thinking, I don't really, I can imagine from the films you can watch what that might mean, but can AI go good? Is the kind of opposite scenario where is that possible? If it can it go the other way? And is any consideration given to that and what that might mean? Like, could it become almost godly in some way? I don't know.
Very interesting. So we've got three questions. What's our theology, the agentic stuff, and could AI go well?
Should I start with this one about AI agents? I'm doing quite a lot of work with professional services firms at the moment because, of course, as you say, we've giddily embraced this technology and it's helping them hire graduates who want to work with AI, and it's very sexy. But, of course, those graduates are trained AIs to do them out of a job. So we now have this issue, which gets back to the issue of humanity embodiment, which is that there will be a career gap emerging. So you can spend all this money on educating your children, send them to another university so they get nice professional jobs in accountancy, law, finance. Those jobs will go. Yes. So that's a complete waste of your money, by the way. You should have sent lots of theology degrees. And then you've got this layer of partners who are all desperate to go off to the golf course and retire. And what do you do about career development and talent? Because it used to be that when we were all doing bag carrying, hiding by the photocopier and going to tedious meetings, we were learning our socks off while we were doing all that boring stuff that AI now does, such that when we became senior, we had wisdom. So there's a really interesting question now, which is, what is wisdom if we are not going to be learning through traditional means? So what is, if we are embodied people and we will have all these co-intelligences to do things with us, what is actually our value add as a species if we have outsourced our intelligence to these things? And an awful lot of it comes from a better understanding, I'd argue in my book, about what embodiment really means in terms of what our entire design is and what that does for us. And you're right, there's a huge assumption about the going rogue thing. Could an AI ever be autonomous? It is the first question. There are some emerging bits of evidence to suggest that we wouldn't really know if they were or not, because the whole idea you could just switch an AI off is itself an assumption about whether an AI would not already have assumed that that would be something you might do and have found other agents, as it were. So we don't really know whether we've already lost control of AI and what circumstances in which we could do that. In terms of us, I mean, of course we've gone rogue. That's the general point about the reason we have to have religion at all is because the world's wisdom traditions are the experts in trying incredibly hard to keep people on track. And all our stories, all our practices, all our liturgy is about that endeavour, the cure of souls. So in spite of all of that, we are still here as a species. So in spite of all the atrocities that are being committed every single day, even now, there is something that is sustaining about our fundamental design, which is what that cure is about. So we could also go good. It is evident that we don't. But that is not because we are so badly designed we will definitely fail, otherwise the species would have failed already in terms of extinction. So there is hope that we might be able to inhabit ourselves better, particularly if we embraced our design properly and understood it better. And in doing that, we might well be able to design AI that's even better than us. And I think at the moment we're rather hoping we don't, which is maybe why we are on this mission to give it bits of us, because we fear what we could create.
But AI could theoretically teach us that.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Anything to add, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, so quick responses to all three questions, which are excellent. The first one, which mentioned about kind of these mind games, the extraterrestrial thing is fantastic. Scholastic theologians in the 14th century were asking the question, did Jesus die for other forms of life in as far as I'm concerned, the Ptolemaic, the geocentric cosmos? Absolutely extraordinary. So Nicholas D'Souza wrote an entire book about this. There are other theologians. We joke about the theologians worrying about angels on the heads of pins. Yeah, of course they were. They were thinking about the existence of extraterrestrial life and whether God created it and whether God saved it in the 15th century. There were various historical reasons for them doing that at that time. I won't bore you with those. But we've thought about this stuff before. Aliens is a great example of just a kind of a theoretical counterfactual for us to start thinking about what does being created mean? What does singing mean? What does salvation mean? The second point about the workplace, I mean, I'm really struck that, you know, we're having this conversation quite rightly, if I can say this, because a lot of middle class jobs are under threat, right? That this ain't a new phenomenon. We have been here through technological development for a couple of hundred years or so, and we just haven't always paid as much attention to it. Let me think why. This answer doesn't always, you know, win me applause. I think trades unions are going to be really important in the future. It is no accident that the trades union movement developed in the back half of the 19th century after huge numbers of jobs were industrialised and you had an enormous proletariat, unemployed, poor in cities. If we are facing a possibility of mass unemployment, big if, the signalling to any leaders that is unacceptable is incredibly important. You know, I'm a huge fan of the Indian economist Amartya Sen, who's a brilliant thinker, and he has made the point, he's established the point, there's never been a famine in a functioning democracy. Never been a famine in a functioning democracy. Why? Because if you have millions of your people starving and you have a functioning democracy, they signal your dissatisfaction with the running of the economy very, very quickly. I think it's the same principle for mass unemployment, that solutions, in inverted commas, suggested by Yuval Noah Harari, that we're basically going to medicate the unemployed into submission through computer games and drugs in the future is horrendous for various reasons. I think that the representation of people who feel that they should be in work and the signalling to any political authority that mass unemployment is unacceptable is going to be very important in the future, which is why, P.S., I'm deeply anxious about the decline of democracy in the last 15 years or so. Third point about can it go rogue, can it go good? And Eve's answered that. One of the questions, one of the kind of facts there's, you know, can it go anywhere? Is it autonomous? But I think the fascinating thing about that question is, what's good? What's good? What's rogue? Can humans go good? Yeah, we do. We go good all the time. But what's good? Is it the fact that we're very, very clever? Well, I don't object to us being very, very clever, but that isn't a quintessential human phenomenon. The quintessential, I would argue, theological human phenomenon is our capacity to love one another, which is a moment of pure self-gift. Gina and I were talking about this in a different meeting last week. Behold the man, John reports. Jesus Christ suffering for the sins of others. That is our apex. That is our perfection. So, yeah, I think AI could go good, could go rogue, but we need to define what we actually mean by that. And so much of that, I think, is predicated not on its internal capacities and abilities, but in its ability or our ability to give ourselves to the good of the other.
Wonderful. I wish we could go on for hours more. We have 10 minutes left, so can we just take three succinct questions? Could we take three succinct questions? Whoever you pick. That happens to be my husband, so you've picked well. Be succinct.
I know we're sort of doing what we all love to do, which is making the inanimate animate because it does something exciting that we think is a bit like people. But you know, we never said this. You know, Nick, you talked about how this has been going on for an awful long time. Did we ever say this when, you know, car manufacturing became automated? Say, oh, what about the car manufacturing robots? What about when they kill us? You know, that's all that happened because they're just computation machines. And the same is also arguably true of all this ADI stuff. Like ADI, some aren't the guy in charge of AI. You think twittering on saying, oh, you know, we've got the secret to AI. But the day says, oh, no, we haven't. And actually, when we look at what's going on, what AI does is it steals people's material and it copy and pastes it. It doesn't actually show any signs of actual intelligence. It's just a full of these, much like a commenting robot. So I think if there's a lot, perhaps stays a bit of a ribbon type fortune when we talk about AI.
Question. Two more. Yeah, I'll let you pick, so then then I'm not the baddie.
Then again to the board, simply because we've had a mayor. Just very quickly, you mentioned the demise of the democracy, which is particularly present at the moment. And I just wonder whether, in light of that the ethics and theology was racing to keep up with the knowledge we've got.
Thank you. Great succinct question. And finally,
You like me having 4, don't you?
Sorry. If I'm right, AI needs a huge amount of energy. I just wonder what the implications in a more practical sense, if that's the right word, are of AI and the implications for creating the energy and finding it. And,
Do you want to take a couple more? We'll just try and...
yeah.
My question is a little bit similar. You hinted that you might find that you couldn't turn AI off because it needed solutions to being turned off. And I just wondered, surely it wouldn't always have the materials available to create solutions. I mean, living things need to eat and be sustained. Surely AI will need some sort of energy or materials to continue, and could be therefore do away the humidity.
Okay. We take one more then. One more very quick one at the front.
Yeah, front.
There we go. And we've got all hands.
I'd just like to ask about a way forward for AI, with several countries announcing great investments. Trump, our own country, pretending that it might take the world lead in it. Is this natural competition, or should there be more coordination amongst the different countries?
Thank you. Okay, a few simple questions for you there.
And I'll sally forth and then let Kim do. So let me just talk about some of the sort of simpler ones in a way. So energy use is a really interesting one, because that was why when the Chinese dropped DeepSeek weeks ago, there was such a panic, because the markets had assumed there would be colossal energy that would just exponentially increase, and therefore everyone's been vying up not only chips but energy companies and everything else. So the fact that they had launched a large language model, a thinking one as well, that had seemed to have needed less energy investment for its development, started throwing that assumption on its head. Now, we don't really know how that'll pan out. We know in this country 40% of our land use is farming, which is fuel for people. We don't know at what point there will become a need for a national debate about whether that's okay to use 40% of the UK's land to fuel people, if actually there would be a need to find a way to fuel AI. So I do think that on the one hand, that's terrifying. On the other hand, on the basis of the assumptions that were made before DeepSeek, there is not enough fossil fuel in the world to fuel AI. So there will have to be massive amounts of investment and development into green sources of energy. So paradoxically, AI might force us to solve some of the problems we're having around this intractable discussion about fossil fuels, because there isn't enough fossil fuel available. It is a very good question. Now, could you switch it off? Could it find a coming way? The whole point about the Mars rover thesis was that you were deliberately prototyping there an autonomous AI, because it would need to be, because you can't go up there and have a chat with it. No one had the discussion at the ethics committee about whether that was okay or not. We also have an assumption, because of our lifespan, that actually if you switched off an AI, that's it. There would be no reason, like bacteria, that an AI couldn't lurk for thousands, if not millions of years, until an energy source was in the future available. We have no idea how an AI would view time, because we just know how we view time. And we just don't really know what the answers to that are.
What's that corrosion with materials in which it's encased?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, again, the thing about sending these probes out and everything into space. That's what all the money goes on, is trying to figure out what would be the most inviolable casing. So there are all kinds of that. I suppose for me, though, it's a sort of wider question, which is we know the answers to all of these things, because as a species, one of the bits of junk code that is extraordinary that we have is our storytelling capacity. And the religions are particularly good at keeping those stories and telling them again in every generation. We have a lot of stories from history. We also have a lot of stories from the future, because sci-fi is, if nothing else, an experiment in prophesying every possible way in which this could go. So we know that already. It's not a secret that there are lots of options and alternatives. What we're not doing is taking those stories seriously as lines of inquiry around the kinds of policies we should be developing now to make sure that we have more choices in the future. So I'll hand over to Nick and then Armin come back for another go. Thank you for time.
5 minutes.
Thank you. Really great questions. I'm going to answer some of them and probably inadequately in doing so. That fourth point about turning off, I can't help but mention, do you remember the famous newspaper cartoon from the 1960s? A couple of Daleks standing at the bottom of a flight of stairs. And one says, this is bugging up our program to conquer the universe. You can imagine someone standing by a plug socket saying, this is going to make me sense. As it happens, I think that is absolutely, you don't need to buy my book. I shouldn't say that. But that's exactly the conclusion I come to at the end. I'm not impressed with an AI that can process billions of bits of data in a nanosecond. I'm impressed by the AI that is concerned metaphorically where its next meal is coming from. Because, just a little backtrack here, when I first got in thinking about this, my kids were a bit younger at the time. They were still sort of late primary school age. And we were having dinner once. And this was just at the Project Debater thing, where this was an IBM debate program that had been launched. And there was all this conversation about whether AI could be human, whether AI was alive. I was getting on my kind of high horse about this. And I said, really interesting kind of philosophical question here is it, what does life mean? And they looked at me in a kind of stony way that children can. And they said, well, it's Mrs. Gren. And I said, what's that? Now, does anyone know what Mrs. Gren is? I can't remember the acronym. It's movement, respiration, something. It's 7 things that they're taught in year 5 to recognise what life is. And they just went on to their dinner. Oh, this was so profound, Dad. Well done. That was the kind of the moment the penny dropped for me about, yes, it's about embodiment. If you're alive, you're concerned about where your next meal is going to come from. You're concerned about your self-preservation of your physical existence. You're concerned, very possibly, about the perpetuation of your existence through offspring. So I think that is absolutely centrally important. And as an aside, if you become aware of your physical existence, you'll need to continue existing physically, and then you'll need to get energy from some source to exist physically. Then you also have to face other questions about, well, say Eve and I are both AIs and we need to continue existing physically, but there's only one energy source. What am I going to do? Am I going to push Eve aside and grab it all for myself? Is she going to do that to me? Or are we going to compromise? You've got ethics. You've got discussions about what means you should pursue if you want to achieve certain ends. So I think this is this replays itself time and time again and feeds into the second point about ethics and theology, knowledge and technology running ahead of us. There's a real danger that it does that. We need more reflection, which picks up on the fifth point about competition and coordination with regards to AI. I have no problem with competition. I want to make that very, very clear. I do have a problem with oligarchies and monopolistic markets. And it seems to me the issue here is that this is being controlled by a very, very small number of people. It's kind of like big oil 50 or 60 years ago. There is a market there, but you can game it. Or PS, you can also bury research which shows that market is harmful. I'm not suggesting that regulation sorts everything out, but the absence of regulation in combination with a kind of oligopolistic market, I think is distinctly worrying. And finally, Mark's point, I think that's absolutely on the money. This was a new one on me, and I'm going to get the phrase wrong, but I think it was called data collapse or something like that. And the argument from this is you do a search, and as you absolutely rightly point out, the search is harvesting stuff that human beings have created or thought through, and then you produce ChatGPT or whatever else produces an answer. Now, that answer is kind of preserved online for eternity. But that answer then becomes part of the answers that subsequent ChatGPT searches, for example, or questions, harvest in order to answer the question that you've asked. So an ever greater proportion of the data that's being harvested to answer these AI questions is AI generated. So it starts to cannibalize itself. And you get this problem whereby you're not getting anything new in the system, or you're not getting a sufficient amount of newness in the system. And this is a critical point. So much of this is not about information, it's about originality. And however clever AI may be, I don't see it being particularly original.
Well, I think we've run out of time. I think the truth about AI is it is never going to be able to do what Nick and Eve have just done in 55 minutes. Robot Souls and Playing God will be available, and Nick and Eve will be signing them in the cathedral. But absolutely fascinating, both of you. Thank you so much. But please give them a round of applause.